This video series is brought to you by the ASU Writing Center within the Academic Support Network. Thank you for joining me as we discuss Part 4 of Critical Reading and Engaging with Sources. This video, our last in the series, will discuss using sources. Let's get started. Let's consider something we covered in our first section of Critical Reading and Engaging with Sources. When you evaluate a source, you should consider how you plan to use that source. You can do this by asking specific questions about how this fits into your research. After you ask these questions and complete the reading, you will need to consider how you will incorporate your sources into your writing assignments. There are 3 different ways that you can incorporate sources into your writing. First, you can summarize. Summarizing is restating in your own words the main idea or argument. Summary helps set up a problem or present background information so everyone is on the same page. Be strategic in what you restate and have a specific purpose for doing so and for not doing so. Second, you can paraphrase. Paraphrasing happens when you refer to an idea from another author, but you are rewording their writing. Be wary of patchwork paraphrasing, where you simply switch out a few words. This information must be cited, indicating it is not your original thought, but came from somewhere else. Finally, you can quote directly. Direct quoting occurs when you want to use another author's writing word for word. Quotes must be cited. Try to use quotations sparingly. Consider paraphrasing the larger points and then quoting specific words that have a deep meaning or impact. It is important to note that you will use these different strategies for different reasons. Let's take a look at each of them. You will want to summarize when you need only the point of a passage, section, or even whole article or book. You will focus on the larger points when summarizing, but be careful not to take away nuance from the argument. Summarizing a source never serves as good evidence. You will want to paraphrase when you can represent what a source says more clearly or pointedly than it does. Set the source aside to focus on the ideas and not be tempted to use the same words as the author. Once you paraphrase information, be sure to compare it to the original source for correct meaning and to make sure it's not a mirror image. A string of 3 words or more requires quotation marks. And finally, you'll want to quote when words are strikingly original or express your ideas so compellingly that the quotation can frame the rest of your discussion. Always have an academically justifiable reason for why you chose to quote. Never quote because it's easier than summarizing or paraphrasing. Once you've picked the best strategy for incorporating your sources, you will also want to consider being descriptive when you bring a source into your writing. Use descriptive words that show your reader what your sources are doing in your paper. For example, you could write something like, Smith and John say cell phones impact learning negatively, but other researchers, Good and Miller, 2023, say cell phones allow for more learning on the go. Contrast this with our next example. Smith and John insist that cell phones negatively impact learning, but other researchers, Good and Miller 2023, contend that cell phones allow for more learning on the go. The second example is far more descriptive about how these 2 sources interact with each other than the first. The first example depends solely on the word say, which doesn't describe how these researchers are saying something or why these researchers are saying something. The second example uses words like insist and contend, which gives us an idea about how these researchers are saying things and why they are saying them. This list shows different descriptive verbs and scenarios in which they can be useful. For example, if your source or author is making a claim, you can use words like argue or insist. Whereas if your source or author is questioning something, you can use words like contend or refute. This is a continuation of the list of descriptive verbs. It shows different scenarios where verbs can be useful. For example, if your source or author is expressing agreement, you can use verbs like acknowledge or corroborate. And when your source or author is making a recommendation, you can use verbs like encourage or implore. Finally, it's crucial to frame your quotations outside simply using descriptive words. Quotations are powerful, but cannot speak for themselves. Your reader will be seeing them out of their natural environment, so your job as a writer is to frame the quotation. To adequately frame a quotation, you need to insert it into what we like to call a quotation sandwich, with the statement introducing it serving as a top slice of bread, and an explanation following it serving as the bottom slice. The introductory or lead-in claim should explain who is speaking and set up what the quotation says. The follow-up statement should explain why you consider the quotation to be important and what you take it to say. Let's look over an example. This is a quotation before it's been appropriately framed. Deborah Tannen writes about academia. Academics believe that intellectual inquiry is a metaphorical battle. Following from that is a second assumption that the best way to demonstrate intellectual prowess is to criticize, find fault, and attack. I agree with Tannen. Another point Tannen makes is that ... While this may feel like an introduction that sets up our author, it's actually lacking in detail. This first sentence, Deborah Tannen writes about academia, doesn't give us very much information about the author. And while this follow-up sentence does offer us some insight into the student author, we don't get to see how they interpret the quote. We simply know that they agree. This example shows a better framing for the quotation. Deborah Tannen, a prominent linguistics professor, complains that academia is too combative. Rather than really listening to others, Tannen insists, academics habitually try to prove one another wrong. As Tannen herself puts it, we are all driven by ideological assumption that intellectual inquiry is a metaphorical battle, that the best way to demonstrate intellectual prowess is to criticize, find fault, and attack. In short, Tannen objects that academic communication tends to be a competition for supremacy in which loftier values like truth and consensus get lost. Tannen's observations ring true to me because I have often felt that the academic pieces I read for class are negative and focus on proving another theorist wrong rather than stating a truth. This introduction is more detailed, offering the background for Tannen and prefacing the quotation by discussing the combativeness of academia. And this follow-up sentence shows how the student author is reading the quote and then allows them to share their own opinion. If you have questions about anything we covered in this video for using sources, our online study hub is a great place to post questions and get a tutor response. If you would like to continue learning about using sources, specifically summarizing, phrasing, and quoting, see this handout, which breaks down these different ways to use evidence. Thank you for joining us to discuss assignment descriptions, and we hope to see you in our next segment discussing types of assignments. Thank you.